Hi, everyone. So for those who have just turned the webinar on, my name is Agnietė. I'm Senior Associate leading our Lithuanian employment practice, and I will tell you some information about the measures during this lockdown season in Lithuania. So shall we move to the next slide? Thank you. So we have quite strict lockdown here since the 16th of March. It is currently scheduled to remain in place until 11th of May, but my guess would be that it will be further extended. And in the beginning, we have had some quite strict measures. So all the non-essential stores have been closed, with the exception of food, pharmacies, and similar. The restaurants closed except for delivery and pickup, schools not working, and so on. But for the past few weeks, the lockdown measures are being gradually lifted piece by piece. So for today, for example, all stores can be open as long as they make sure that the number of customers is limited. Restaurants who have seating outside and can ensure proper social distancing measures can also work, and so on. So more and more employees can return to work, and companies can carry on with their business. But this whole situation, of course, have left a lot of companies with situations where they either cannot provide employees with the work, or where the workload has been significantly reduced. And also due to the school closure, many employees cannot work because they have to take care of their young children. So can we move to the next slide, please? I will tell you about the main measures that the companies can take to deal with this situation. And the main one, and used the most commonly, is idle time. So it's a situation where you cannot provide the employee with the work that was agreed in employment contract. We had an option of idle time before the lockdown, but since the beginning of lockdown, the Parliament introduced the new type of emergency idle time with better conditions for business in terms of payment and availability of subsidies to cover part of the cost. So there are three main conditions to declare this emergency idle time. The first one is that the company should have no possibility to provide the employee with the agreed work because of the state of emergency and lockdown. Now, the link does not have to be very direct, and the authorities are quite flexible in explaining and interpreting this clause. So, for example, even if the company's activities are not prohibited, such as manufacturing, if you have a situation where the orders have slowed down and this is the reason why you cannot work at full capacity, you can also declare idle time because the slowing down of orders and of business is caused by the lockdown and the coronavirus pandemic. Another criteria requirement is that the work cannot be performed remotely. So if there is some work that the employee could do from home, you should not declare emergency idle time. And also, if there is any other work at the company, even if the employee is overqualified to do it, the company should at first offer the employee this job for the temporary period, and only if the employee refuses to do that, you could declare emergency idle time. And this idle time can be full-time, so for the whole lockdown period, or it can be partial. So for example, you can declare, if you have work for 50% of the week, the employee can work half of the week, get half of their salary, and be on idle time for the remaining part of the week. And the payment for emergency idle time, it does not depend on how much the employee is making normally. The minimum that the company has to pay is state minimum wage, so it would be 607 for a full month of idle time. If the idle time is partial, you pay proportionately. And it is also possible to cancel idle time anytime. So, for example, if you have 1 or 2 days of work, you can call out the employee from idle time. And once the work is finished, if you still meet the conditions for idle time, you can send the employee on idle time for the remainder of the lockdown period. We can move on to the next slide. Thank you. Yeah, so there are some other cost-cutting measures that are not specific to the COVID situation, but the companies are using them, or at least interested in exploring the options. So the most common question is, can we reduce the salaries? And the answer is it's complicated. The salary must be agreed in an employment contract, and you have to get the employee's consent to make any reductions to the salary. And we even have a prohibition to dismiss the employee on the ground that they have refused to reduce their salaries. So some companies have successfully implemented it by reducing salaries by 10, 15, 20%, but it does require open communication and cooperation with the employees, because you cannot do this unilaterally. Another option to cut the costs is to reduce or cancel variable remuneration like bonuses and benefits. It's easier than a normal salary reduction if those bonuses are not contractual. For example, they are provided in internal policies of the company, then you will not require employee consent, and you can make the changes based on the company's discretion, following the information and consultation process and properly informing employees in advance. However, if the bonus is agreed in an employment contract or an agreement concluded with the employees, then you will require the employee's consent to reduce or make any other changes in variable remuneration. Employee lease or outsourcing is another option that could be attractive in this time. So normally, to lease your employees, you would have to meet quite strict criteria, register with the labor authorities and so on. But for the period of lockdown, the government has introduced much less strict conditions for this temporary employee outsourcing or employee lease, and companies who normally don't carry out employee lease activities, they could register as employee lease service providers in one business day and lease their employees to other businesses who need them. So the employees can still have a job, and the company has some kind of revenue for the services that the employees are providing. Unpaid leave is naturally quite attractive option for businesses. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which side you're looking at, it cannot be declared on the company's discretion. It should always be requested by the employees, and the initiative and the actual will to have unpaid leave should be there. It cannot be forced or pressured by the company. During the economic crisis of 2008, 2009, we had quite many cases where the companies were burned because a lot of employees were taking unpaid leave at the same time, and this was declared as fake unpaid leave, and the courts clearly said that unpaid leave cannot be used just to manage the workload issues or the company's cash flow problems. And another option that could be good is changing the employees' working hours, moving to part-time, and thus reducing the salary. But same as with salary reduction, it will require employees' consent and cooperation. The state help and subsidies for employers, it's mainly right now in the form of subsidies helping companies to cover the cost of idle time wage. So it is available only for companies who declare this emergency idle time. And the purpose of this subsidy is to help companies retain as many employees, as many jobs as possible, and to reduce the number of dismissals that are inevitable in this situation. So it works like that. The company declares idle time, pays the employees minimum wage or more if it chooses to during idle time, and then claims the subsidies from the state. And the subsidies are paid not to the employees, but to the employers. The company can choose the subsidy amount, and it's 70 or 90% of what you pay during the idle time, and the caps are different for these percentages, so you can make the calculations and see what works better for you. The subsidies will be paid until the end of lockdown, and there is one requirement that it's quite strict for companies, so there is an obligation to retain at least half of the subsidized job positions for 3 months after the end of subsidy payments. And right now, actually today, the government is meeting and deciding on further subsidy and state health measures. So it seems that we will have additional subsidy support for the period of after the lockdown, when the help will be definitely needed. Yeah, another type of state support, it's for the employees in form of sick leave. So we have situations where employees cannot work because they have to take care of young children due to school closure, or they have to take care of disabled family members who can no longer go to care facilities because they are temporarily closed, or the employees themselves have some severe chronic illnesses and are at an increased risk if they contract COVID-19. So for these employees, the state grants them the right to take sick leave for the whole period of the lockdown, which will be paid by the government, by Social Insurance Fund. So the employees do not have to go to work, and the companies do not have to pay them for that time. And this benefit applies if the employee cannot do their work remotely. And we can move on to the next slide, the remote work. So remote work, it is not mandatory actually during lockdown, but it's very strongly recommended, and the majority of businesses have chosen to continue work from home. So most of the people, us too, working, are doing this webinar from our homes. In Lithuania, we do have some labor law regulation on the remote work, and many companies already have remote work policies setting some rules on how remote work will be performed. But for those companies to whom this remote work thing is quite new, we do recommend either to introduce new policies or at least communicate the main terms of remote work via email to employees and discuss various practical matters. For example, what are the working hours, whether they will be the same as working in the office or they can be more flexible, at what times and by which means the employees should be reachable and available, the practical issues related to work equipment, whether the company will be providing laptops or whether the employees are expected to use their own equipment and to be compensated for it, the main rules on work health and safety, and so on. So this is more of a practical issue to make sure that everyone knows what are the rules and expectations on remote work, and so that the company's liability is limited to well, a certain reasonable extent, but it doesn't have to be overly formalistic. Yeah. So this is it for Lithuania. Thank you very much.